Special in-studio guest for about half hour or so, Louisiana State Supreme Court Judge Scott Crichton is here. Mr. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
I guess my first question would be, since we whenever we have guests of note in the studio, men or women of achievement and intellect and integrity, we're trying to find Matt a job. So,
you got anything?
Are there currently any openings on the Louisiana State Supreme Court?
Oh.
And or is there anything you might could help him out with?
Well, it's a full crew, and
yeah.
Well, for
now,
now,
and we have this budget crisis
Yeah,
that we
exactly.
keep talking about, right?
well, whatever happens, don't look at his Facebook page.
Oh man.
Let me see. What can't you talk about? All the cool.
I can talk about anything other than a pending case before a Louisiana state court.
What I wanted to talk to you. There's a lot that we gotta tread lightly, but I wanted to talk to you.
No, no. We don't have to tread lightly. He can just say, "I can't talk about that,"
and he will, and he's
Okay.
not shy about that. He just can't do it. He's got judicial ethics and rules, essentially,
Well, you'll
right?
never be a radio producer, Mister. Too bad for you.
I wanted to talk to you about the death penalty because I have talked to so many people who say if we're going to have it, use it. If we're not going to use it, do away with it.
Well, I'm one of those that has always said if we're going to have it, use it. So we are in total agreement here. The problem is we do have it in the law, but we're not enforcing it and we're not carrying it out. We do get death penalty verdicts fairly regularly, especially in Caddo Parish and East Baton Rouge Parish and a few others. But in terms of what comes later, it's a very slow process in terms of the post-conviction.
Why is that? Is that? But that doesn't have to do with the Louisiana courts. It has to do with more federal decisions, I would think.
It has to do with both. The district attorneys are fairly prompt in getting cases to trial, following arrest and pretrial proceedings and the jury trial and the jury verdict. And that normally takes a couple of years, though. I mean, it's a lot of work that goes into the preparation of a death penalty case on both sides, the prosecution side and the defense side. I know that. I did it back in the 1980s. And I also presided over cases from 1990 to 2014 involving the death penalty. And then the appeal process directly up to the Louisiana Supreme Court is fairly prompt, too. It takes about a year, maybe 18 months. But
What's the longest a guy's been on death row?
28 years, maybe.
Well,
Nathaniel Code's been there.
And I prosecuted Nathaniel Code
Right.
in 1990, so this is his 27th year on death row.
Does
Sepulveda from DeSoto Parish is about the same.
That's right.
Very
It's
similar.
close.
the fact that guys can be convicted in capital cases and the death penalty, I'm not going to say mete it out because then it's not for nigh on 3 decades. Does that affect prosecutors in cases like that, knowing if I ask for the death penalty, it's probably not going to happen anyway?
Well, yes, and I think district attorneys across the state have been a little bit more reluctant in recent years to ask for the death penalty. They may indict for first-degree murder, but they then may say, because of all the expense and all the work and all the trouble that it's going to get, and the legalese, especially during the post-conviction process, it may not be worth our allocation of time and resources, and therefore they may say, well, I'll just opt to proceed on first-degree murder without the death penalty, or second-degree murder, and I'll ask for a life sentence. If convicted. Of course, that's mandatory if convicted, but there are two issues that are hanging all this up. One is this 3-drug cocktail that we have been reading about. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have been harassed and stalked, and there's been picketing and that sort of thing, and so the drugs are, at least one of the 3 drugs is difficult to get. And then the other one, and of course in recent months and last couple of years, Oklahoma and I believe one other state, Alabama, nearby, they have gone with this nitrogen hypoxia. I had to look that up last night.
It's still an injection?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a gas, and and it will produce death very quickly.
Could we go back to the electric chair?
We could go back. Utah has the firing squad as an option.
Ask Gary Gilmore.
And it seems to me that the inmate ought to be given a choice. I think number one, the 3-drug cocktail, or number two, the nitrogen hypoxia, which one drug and you're out after about 40 seconds. Firing squad is one.
This kind of delay thing. This is, I would assume, given the let's say stick-to-itiveness of the of capital punishment opponents, I would suspect this is not going to change anytime soon.
Well, the opponents, if this is all about the legislation, and if the opponents want to have the legislature repeal the death penalty, they can go to Baton Rouge and they can get a bill back on the docket just like they did this past year and repeal it. They can do that. The U.S. Supreme Court can repeal it as a violation of the Eighth Amendment. However, they're not doing that.
How many states still allow it?
36.
36 states still.
But they don't really have to get
Do you think it's a deterrent, Scott?
I do.
You've been in the legal system for years.
I think it's a deterrent.
If I'm going to sit there for 30 years, it didn't deter anything.
Well, I just heard on the news this morning about a case in Texas involving an inmate who was convicted, serving a life sentence, who beat a guard to death. Somehow got out of his handcuffs and literally beat him to death
with a pipe. Yeah,
with a pipe. Started initially with his fist and then with a pipe, and then we had recently the Angola 5 in South Louisiana.
If you're in for life, you got nothing to lose.
But in any event, one thing about the death penalty is that the person who is executed, and I'm talking about after a jury, first of all, after a grand jury indicts for first-degree murder. Secondly, after a trial jury convicts unanimously for first-degree murder. Then after a full appeal to the Louisiana Supreme Court, and then the United States Supreme Court, and then I'm not through yet, Robert. I'm still proceeding here, and then a careful review by the federal courts to see if there are any U.S. constitutional violations. After all that due process, some years later, hopefully not too many, if there are no errors in how we got to the penalty of death, then it needs to be carried out, and it needs to be publicized. I hate to sound like the Grim Reaper here at Monday morning.
Right, that's okay.
Hey, public execution.
Well, I do think it's a deterrent. I believe that if it's carried out, and if we are, if the public knows about it, I believe truly it's a deterrent. What really boggles my mind is the inmate who has committed capital murder, who is on death row, who is begging for his life. Think about the fact that the victim gets no due process.
Yeah. But you want air conditioning.
Well, and actually they won.
They won, exactly.